In 1972, I wanted to be my own boss, and I did a little research, and I decided I wanted to get in the wine business, and I moved our family to the Napa Valley. After investigating some vineyards here, and as a result of my earlier research in Chicago, I was hell-bent on getting a hillside vineyard, and there weren't very many available. Finally, on the third day with the real estate guy, he said, oh, down in the Stag's Leap, there's a Al Phillips. He's got a parcel there, and he hasn't been able to sell it for 3 years. Let's go down. And when I drove in that driveway and I saw those hillsides and those exposures, before I ever dug any test holes or talked to people, I had this feeling, this is it. There was a house and a garage at a caretaker's place. The vines had been planted 50 years earlier, in 1922. Battisti Scansi was the owner in 1922 who had planted these vines. But I was looking longer term, and I felt that this was the place.
We drove in here third week in January. It was about 70 degrees. All the hills were vibrant green because it rains in the winter out here, and the vineyards were dormant. I'd never seen a grapevine before. But having just driven out from Chicago, where in January it was 15 below and snow and bleak and gray, it was like, oh my gosh, this is a pretty nice place. It was beautiful. But then within a few weekends, I realized what pulling rocks out of a vineyard was like, and I wasn't liking it that much after that for a while.
Bit by bit, 6, 7 acres at a time, we pulled the old vines and replanted, but there was a 7-acre piece on the hillside facing south that had never been planted, and we thought that would be ideal. On the advice of a vineyard manager, we ripped the soils in the summer of '73, and we had that November horrendous early rainstorm with some terrible erosion. When we planted the rootstock, the deer got in, ate the rootstock down before we could bud. After 5 years of grape growing and learning grape growing, we decided to get in the wine business. And beginning in 1978, with our Cabernet that we'd planted on our Upper 7 vineyard, we launched our first wine.
The '78 harvest was a tough one for us. It was Dad's first harvest of his Hillside Cabernet grapes. It was a pretty hot weather during September picking time, and he had a tough time finding a picking crew. So he couldn't get a crew for the day he wanted to pick the grapes. In fact, he didn't get one for 3 days. So those hillside grapes really got ripe, pretty high sugar and really ripe grapes by the time he got them off. In fact, by the time he got them off, he thought he'd blown it.
We knew there was something with the '78 cab, and even though we made it like we make it today, inadvertently, with higher sugars and fuller ripeness and physiologically mature grapes, our first inkling was the reception of the '78 cab. And in 1993, and I was just talking to Michael O'Reilly, who organized, along with Riedel and others in Europe, a tasting in Germany with all Francophiles against classified growth. And we put our '78 cab in there, and it was blind tasted in an 8-course dinner, and they narrowed it down, and in the end, the '78 cab won. It was 1982 when Doug said, the grapes from a couple of these blocks are really different. We think they're better than the others, so why don't we make a second Cabernet? And we did, and we called it Reserve, which in those days was a word that represented the highest quality, except there's no criteria for it. And we knew that, and it was the next year that Doug came up with the idea, let's not use that Reserve. There are 9.95 bottles of wine out there with the word Private Reserve on it. So he came up with the name Hillside Select, which seemed very fitting. The grapes are grown on the hillside. We select best blocks for it. So we started in 1983. It was the first year we did that, had that on the label. And we proceeded to trademark it, which was a good idea too. And that's how we started on the name.
It's the decade of the '80s, and Elias and I are basically full-bore, hands-on, doing all the winemaking, which means all the grunt work, all the labor. And it seemed like every year at harvest time we'd be really busy on the crush pad, and Dad would walk by with a tour group or a few friends and showing them around. He'd say hi. And he'd always make the comment in front of his friends to Elias and me. He'd say, "When are you guys going to make another 78? In other words, when are we going to match it?" Yeah. So it was like, it was really starting to bug us because we weren't doing it. And finally, I think it was the 1991 vintage. 91. We thought we did it, so we had a special Magnum made in a special box.
It was a 3-liter.
It was 3-liter?
Yeah. Before we bottled the wine, Doug and I were tasting the wine in the barrel, and we were just amazed at how good it was. And then we go, this can be as good as the 78. So we said, we're going to do, John, Doug said to me, I think we're going to do something special for John.
So one morning they marched in my office with this box, and on the side of the box, they had engraved, "We think we did it." And indeed they did. They really did. And since then, they've continued to do it.
In the early days, we were about 30% new oak in the Cabernet. And Doug and I would taste through the cellar, and we started to realize that, these wines were still so fruity, even after 2 years in the barrel, that they could handle more oak, that they were so robust and rich that adding a little more oak to them would actually, enhance the whole package. So we went from 30% in the early days to about 50% around the early 90s. And then, basically by 91, 92, we went to 100% because we felt that those wines could handle that kind of oak regime. Also, we started to extend the period of oak aging from the traditional 24 months to the 34 months in brand new, 100% new French oak barrels.
He becomes winemaker and goes to Dad and says, "We need more new oak, more new barrels." I was the winemaker. I was trying to be fiscally responsible. So when I was a winemaker,
you didn't ask for it.
I didn't have much. We didn't have much money. So I was proud to say we had some 8, 9, 10-year-old barrels in the cellar when I was winemaker. And he takes over in '94, goes to Dad behind my back and says, "We need more money for barrels." I find out about this later. I'm like, huh? Dad says, "Elias, whatever you need, you got it." So boom, all of a sudden, we're down to the oldest barrel in the place is maybe 3 years old, and the wines were a lot better, so I guess it was a good move. But we
had a different way of
you never let me get new barrels.
A different way of asking.
This site for growing Cabernet is just wonderful. It's a jewel. We're at the kind of the head of Stag's Leap District. It's almost like a box canyon, if you will. And so all our hillside vineyards have exposures to the south, southwest, or west. And so it's wonderful exposure for grape ripening. The hillside vineyards, they're all shallow soil, so the vines have to struggle, so they never produce too many leaves, and the grapes don't produce too many grapes either. The grapes they do produce are very small, almost like blueberries, so you get wonderful concentration of flavor and richness in the resulting wines.
I will say Mother Nature really is the winemaker. It's our job to kind of take what she's given us and translate it into a great bottle of wine. Sometimes, some years, we have to go in the vineyard many times during veraison, green thinning, all those things that need to be done to make great Hillside Select. Today we even remove little berries from within clusters.
Hillside Select really speaks to this ranch, to this place. It's a wine of a place, without a doubt. And there's only 50 acres of grapes here, and actually all 50 don't make the cut for Hillside Select, depending on, Mother Nature and what she gives us.
We have had a great time, 30 years, making this wine. And we hope the people enjoy this wine as much as we have enjoyed making it.